with the whole Burns situation and Scott Boras, same with what we've been hearing about Alex Bregman. It honestly just seems like it's the typical Boras situation. We get a little bit further along in negotiations. We're getting close to a deal happening, between a team and the player, and then last second, Boras decides to throw some things in there, and then he tries to get another team involved, and if that's not working, to gain some leverage, and it's like we get a mystery team involved out of nowhere to try to drive up that price, or get a opt out thrown in there is kind of something that we've heard thrown around. We don't really know if that's for sure true or not. But you can imagine why the Giants wouldn't want to do another one of those. They've already gotten burned on that with the Snell situation. And while we've heard that an opt-out might try to have that come after, say, 2 or 3 years, at the end of the day, the Giants are still taking on a lot of money on the front end and potentially 2 draft picks because of the qualifying offer. So it really doesn't make a ton of sense for Posey to want to say, okay, let's take on all this risk, and if our guy is good, then we lose him after 2 or 3 years, and then we got to do this whole free agency game all over again. So I really think Posey's trying to avoid doing that, and it's kind of resulted in a little bit of a standoff with Boras. And I think so far it seems like Posey's just trying to call his bluff, because we see that the Red Sox have made moves for Crochet. I believe today they just signed Patrick Sandoval from the Angels, and you see that they're interested in other arms. You see the Blue Jays are interested in Nick Pivetta. So you're seeing a lot of these teams kind of pivot. Baltimore also got Sugano, the older pitcher from Japan. So you're seeing a lot of these other burn suitors go after arms where you don't really see that with the Giants. You've seen them reported interest in Walker Buehler, and other than that, you haven't really heard much else on the starting pitching front with the Giants. So should be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's safe to assume it's 100% like a Boras thing that's holding it up. And I honestly, I'll give Posey props for not, taking the bait and, standing firm, because it doesn't seem like he's falling for that tomfoolery. So I got to respect that.
Yeah. I said it last week that I'm a huge believer, as much as I want to see them just get the deal done. I'm just a huge believer, and you don't bid against yourself. And I don't think there's a single person in the Giants organization that believes Burns has any interest in going to Toronto. So, until a serious other suitor comes in, I just don't see it. So
I do think Baltimore is a little bit more unpredictable. While I do find it hard to believe that they would pay up on that, 8-year, $250 million level that we assume that the Giants are willing to pay. They do have new ownership, so maybe they do get a little bit more aggressive, but it is odd that we haven't really heard them, super aggressive towards re-signing Burns and Santander, considering that they don't have to give up those picks for the qualifying offer since they were their guys. So I don't know. We'll see. I still lean more towards feeling very confident that the Giants will eventually get this done, and they might have to meet in the middle with the Giants, and they might not be willing to give that opt out after, say, year 3 that Boras wants. And I honestly don't understand why he wants that, because I believe Burns would be around 33 to 34 years old by the time that hits. So you're really banking on Burns having like a Justin Verlander type trajectory if you're wanting him to hit free agency again at that point, or Max Scherzer. And that's just those guys are unicorns. That's super uncommon to see.
I think he's kind of banking on, and like you saw it with Garrett Cole, and they kind of threatened it with Cole. And I know it does give the ability to kind of like renegotiate as you're getting close to that. So if they think Burns can get more on the open market, they might be able to get the Giants to slap another year on, or, basically restructure the back end, the rest of that deal, and add like a couple mil. So, I mean, it gives them a little bit of leverage, I guess, if they were to try and renegotiate, even if he doesn't want to go anywhere. Like the whole Garrett Cole thing this year, where it was pretty clear that Cole didn't want to leave. He just wanted to try and like renegotiate his deal. And the Yankees were like, fine, dude, hit free agency. And they just went, oh, never mind. And they just opted in. So I get kind of the logic, but also it's like, are you really going to opt out? Like, are you really going to throw the ball so well for 3 years that you're, a top 3 or 4 Cy Young candidate every year, that you're going to actually have the guts to opt out at 33 or 34 years old and see what the market gives you? I have my doubt.
Yeah, and just money aside and, value aside, it really comes down to what does Burns want at this point in his career? Does he want, to go back home and spend the last 7-8 years of his MLB career in his, home state? Does he want to go and try to compete and, potentially contend within, the next year or two? Does he want to go to a place where he can be like the vet and try to, take on more of that mentorship for another up and coming team? It's like, what does he want to do from a personal standpoint? And I think it just makes more sense for him to go back to Cali. So, all the signs are pointing to us. So I'm just kind of waiting for that to drop.
Yeah.
Something I do want to add on to that I haven't really heard people bring up is what a steal they got Logan Webb for on that extension. I know that was something talked about at the time, but 5 years, $90 million for a guy entering, I think it was his age 27 season. And you have Burns, who's entering, I think, his age 30 season, possibly landing an 8-year, $250 million plus deal. And you got Webb for 5 years, $90 million. You need to take advantage of having a front end of the rotation type arm like that. While he's still there and while he's still in his prime. He's still young, but man, that has to be one of the biggest bargains in the entire league when you look at what the free agent guys are getting. So hats off to Farhan on that one.
Yeah. And we were all like, and I know I'm big on asset allocation. So I look at the rotation right now. You got, you're paying $25 million to Robbie Ray. You're only paying what, 18? Does that come out, or 19 a year to Webb right now? Mm-hmm. You can afford to pay this big deal because on the back end of your rotation, Farhan kind of dropped the ball and he gave $11 million to Jordan Hicks, who's inevitably going to end up in the bullpen at some point. But you've got 2 pre-arbitration guys that are going to fill out your 4th and 5th spots more than likely. Even if you sign Sasaki, he's going to be on a pre-arb rookie deal for 3 years. So you can absolutely afford to be paying $30-35 million to one of your starters and then have Webb on a cheap deal for at least the next 3. I think he has 3 more years left on his deal now. Yeah. And then, Robbie Ray's only under contract for 2 more years. So a lot of that money is going to come off the books in 2 years.
4 years for Webb, including this year.
Yeah.
Oh, so he has 4. So you have $53 million. You could potentially be paying, like, and I'm going to go on high end here and say Burns gets 35. You could basically have $53 million allocated to your 2 aces at the front of your rotation.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
George says he gets 12 million this year. What I'm doing, George, is I'm counting it as his tax hit because I believe they usually do the average, salary for the length of the deal. So his tax hit is going to be like $18 million for 18. All 5 of the seasons, even if the actual number is lower for what ownership is paying.
Yeah, if any of you guys want to look this stuff up, I usually go through Spotrac and it breaks it down for you. It'll show you what they're hitting by year, which is more of a number to follow for, like the NFL salary cap. But if you look at right next to it, there's a column and it shows luxury tax. And it's exactly what Cody said. It just averages it out. And it is 18 mil. But it does, if you look at his per year basis, it goes up to 23 and eventually 24 mil at the end of the contract, which still a very good price for what you're getting out of Webb. And even in that last year, we're looking at, 2028. And by then, imagine what an arm like him is going to get per year. It's going to be way more than 24 million.
Yeah.
It already is.
Yeah. He'd be making closer to 30 right now if he was on the open market. Easily.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's, I mean, do you guys have any concerns as far as getting Burns done? Like, maybe what percentage do you think it is that he's going to be with the Giants?
80-20.
Yeah, I would say 80 to 85%. I feel like there's probably like I'd give it like a 10% to the Blue Jays, maybe 12% to the Blue Jays, and then the other to the Orioles. Maybe he liked it there and he wants to go back, but I mean, Baltimore is not really the most desirable area and it's a smaller market. So I feel like with just some of his comments he made before regarding looking at, what the team's futures are going to look like, I do think the Giants do have a little bit of an upper hand as far as the money goes. Now the farm system, they're not going to compete with the Orioles, but the Orioles are also not going to retain guys either. So, or at least most of the more MLB ready guys they have right now.
In my opinion, the only way this deal doesn't get done is if ownership gets cold feet. If they back out and say, you know what, we don't think it's a good idea to pay this much for this type of player at this, at this time. Yeah. That's the only way it doesn't get done, in my opinion. Otherwise, everything else aligns perfectly. The need, the fit, the region, the market, everything matches up perfectly. And obviously the interest is there. To me, it's in ownership's hands right now.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. That like ownership not being willing to fork out the money would be the biggest reason this deal doesn't get done. Yeah. And then I would also throw out like I think Toronto honestly is like 5%, and it's basically like the Giants back out, and that's why Toronto ends up with them. And the Orioles, I mean, their new ownership, and they definitely aren't going to retain Santander. I think that one's obvious. They're not going to pay to retain a guy that's basically a full-time DH when they have guys like Kobe Mayo coming up, and they're trying to clear space for some of these young players. So I get why they're letting him go, but I would think their ownership was more aggressive in trying to get Burns, given that they're pretty thin on pitching in their system. Their system is very strong. Obviously, it's one of the best, but they're pretty thin on like legit pitchers coming up right now.
But hey, could I interest you in a Carson Whisenhunt for a Kobe Mayo?
You might be looking at Harrison, honestly, if you're going to make that deal, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, but
I would love Kobe
then
Mayo.
It comes into where do you put him? Yeah, I like that guy too. You can mash.
Put him at second. I don't care. Put him at first.
But yeah. So the other way that I could see him going somewhere else would be if a big market team enters it late, like that he's just lingering on the market long enough. I think this is what Boras is really banking on, is Burns just lingering on the market and some teams circling back because they get, Steve Cohen just sees him sitting there and he goes, you know what? I'm already $50 million over the tax. What's another 35? I think that's Boras's hope. And then it kind of puts the Giants into a panic to up their offer, cave into whatever demands he has. I feel like that's kind of what Boras is hoping. But if the market holds true like it is now, I just don't see him really going to another team.
Boras reminds me of the Grinch this time of the year. Just trying to ruin our Christmas, man.
Except for his heart never grows 3 sizes.
I just wonder if it does come back to bite Boras like it did with Montgomery and Snell last year. I don't know. I really don't think Corbin Burns is going to be the type that's going to want to hold out for too long. I mean, I can totally see it playing out towards the end of the year. I just don't see this being a situation like Snell and Montgomery. I think too many people around the league took notice to that and aren't going to want to play that game again. Burns is a guy that never misses time, so I don't think he's going to be wanting to sit around and waiting. And ultimately, if he already kind of has his mind made up on where he wants to go, I don't see why he would want to really keep going back and forth for months on end over a few mil. So ultimately,
what happens if I was gonna say, what happens if Sasaki signs with the Giants? It's not to say the Giants wouldn't still have the money, because they would, but maybe ownership's like, we got this guy making $800,000. Why are we going to pay you? And all of a sudden the Giants just rip their offer out from under Boras and Burns, and all of a sudden he's stuck with going to Toronto. I mean, he'll be well compensated, but like, does he really want to go sit in Canada for 8 years on crappy teams that are going to battle for fourth? I mean, yeah, I say that as a Giants fan who's watched Giants battle for fourth for 3 years in a row, but still.
division is a little bit more open though than the AL East. I mean, if you're the Blue Jays, man, and you have your two best players, your franchise guys on expiring deals, I mean, who cares what your infield defense looks like? Those are your two key pieces, and they very well both might be gone. I could totally see that happening, unless they get a deal done with Vladdy this season. But for me, I mean, you got the Padres who are having money issues and do this like almost bigger market version of like what the A's would do, where they're like constantly flipping over their roster and going and trading guys before they're going to get paid, bringing new guys, collecting prospects, shipping them back out, getting veteran players, and doing this whole game. That's not really a sustainable winner right there. You know, they might be good for 2 years at a time, but then they're going to have really bad down years as well when they're constantly flipping over their roster like they have under AJ Preller. So you have that situation, and then the D-backs have a really bad pitching issue. They were one of the best hitting teams in the league last year, but we saw what happened once that couldn't hold up for the whole season. When you get down the home stretch of the season, you really need pitching to come through and in the playoffs, and they don't have that. So, you know, the Giants, they have a big offseason. There's no reason they can't take over those two spots in the division and be a little bit closer to the Dodgers.
Yeah, I do think the second through fourth spots are pretty wide open. And you see it just when the Giants play the Padres and the Diamondbacks. I'd have to go back and look at what their final record was against each. I think they were actually leading the season series against the Padres for most of the year, and then they might have gotten swept the last series against them, and they ended up losing it 5-7 or something. I don't know what the season series finished at for them, but against the Padres, against Arizona, the Giants were super competitive, each of the last couple of years. So it's not, they're a lot closer to those two teams. At least it feels like to me. But then, obviously the Dodgers, you're going to have to find a way to beat them more than 3 or 4 times a year, which the Padres and Diamondbacks play the Dodgers way better than the Giants did. So, but I do think you're close to closing that gap.